So welcome everyone to our session, Academic Integrity Myth-Busting as part of Academic Integrity Awareness Day. Just a quick notice that we are recording today's session so that those who couldn't attend can watch later. So if you have any issue with that, please just email us at Academic Skills. So before we begin, I do want to acknowledge and celebrate the Ngunnawal people on whose traditional lands we're meeting today, and also pay my respects to elders past and present, especially when we talk about things like academic integrity. I think it's important to think of First Nations perspectives of knowledge and of scholarship, and of also being respectful of knowledge ownership. So our participants today in our esteemed panel is myself, Tara Starwood. I'm the manager of academic skills at ANU Library. I also have my colleague Donloza Verduleva, who is one of our learning advisors. Tuning in online is Dr. Tanya Colwell from the College of Arts and Social Sciences. I don't know if Roald is here, but he may tune in at some point. And I did make a special thing of pronouncing his name, so it's Roald Melienke. From CAP, which is a very challenging surname for me. We also have Hassan Riaz from Anusa and Tristan Yip from PASA. So welcome everyone today. This session will be really fairly structured, so we can get into some of the big myths that people often have about academic integrity, and then we'll let people present ask the questions they'd like to ask. Because a lot of students often have those questions, but don't always know how to form them, where to ask them. And at the end, I'll show you some resources that you can use if you have any issues yourself with academic integrity or even a breach. Okay, so, before we begin, we will do a Menti, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about academic integrity at ANU. Things have been evolving over the years, moving away from the sort of academic misconduct rule of the past to a rule of academic integrity. And a lot of people don't really understand the difference between those two, but it is actually a really important one. So what the uni is talking about is, how do we behave as scholars? How do we, uphold the reputation of our workplace, the university, and ourselves? And that's just beyond misconduct, beyond, a slap on the wrist for doing the wrong thing or for plagiarizing. It's about how do we behave in an ethical and scholarly way? And how do we, do the best for ourselves as well? So it's a whole community response. It's the same rule for every faculty, for every area, and then it's applying that to the general community. So it's really important for all students and staff as well to learn about academic integrity, because not knowing is not really an excuse. So it's certainly your responsibility as a student to understand the academic integrity rule and to understand how it applies to your education. So what we're going to do today is try to dispel some of those myths and answer some of those questions you have for those fun gray areas that we all experience. So just to begin, I've got a quick Menti to get us started, and you can use your phone device to do that, but I'll just pop that window up and get that ready for us. Screen sharing stop for a moment, and I will get it back up. So let's screen. I'm not used to one screen when on campus, so I'll get back into it. I will be as quick as I can be with these one screen world. Okay, and of course that's being blocked by, there we go. So I'll just pop that. So what you do is you go to menti.com and you pop in the code 53760731, and I will do it myself. We're answering the first question of what confuses you most about academic integrity? My answer is, we do get a lot of questions about academic integrity. We've got one already, understanding my responsibilities and what it means for my university work, citing basic facts, how much similarity on Turnitin is okay. That's a really good one. So when to quote and when to paraphrase. That is also a really good one. Exam cheating, yes. Maybe good ones. Give it just another minute. That's all that's coming through. So next one. And what do you hope to get out of this session? So what do you hope to learn today? Same code for this one. All right, so we've got core rules around essay writing citation, a clearer understanding of how to avoid getting in trouble, fair enough, copyright issues in research, a bit more confidence going forward when it comes to using the work of others. Yes, that's a really good one. Second, as people pop those in. Good practices as per the academic integrity rule. That's a really good one too. So what is best practice? How do we know that we're doing the right thing? All right, excellent. So I'll pop those ones into the presentation when it's finished, so that when we do provide the recording, we can also look at what people's responses were. Okay. So what I thought we would do now is just go into some common academic integrity myths that students bring to us, and we'll sort of let the panel go around and have a bit of a chat about them. Some of them are probably ones we've come across more times than we can count, and some of them are sort of the curlier ones we've had over the years. Okay, so myth one, I already know a fact, so I do not need to reference it. This is a very common one. It's tricky that the sky is in fact blue. There is in fact oxygen in the air. At what point do we have to cite facts? So I might throw to Tanya first for this one.
Thanks very much, Tara. Cheers. Yeah, as you say, this is a really loaded one, isn't it? And you know what is meant by the term fact is really open to philosophical discussion as well. But we won't go down that route exactly. But again, in general, I guess broad details about events, people, or places that are sort of commonly known or accepted amongst the community, particularly if they're commonly known in a particular disciplinary context. These things generally don't need references. So like I'm coming from a humanities perspective in particular. And so in most contexts, pretty much things like, for example, fighting in World War I began in 1914, or, you know, Paris is the capital of France, or like Voltaire, to take a person, was a philosopher. These kinds of things don't really need citations. They're sufficiently well known out there in the world to be able to take that as fact. But details that are perhaps less commonly known, or that are less commonly known in particular contexts, do typically need references. So like if I was writing, and I'm a historian, so if I was writing a history, say on, to take a really random example, like regional mayors, in New South Wales. And I might be talking about the dates when a particular mayor of Dubbo was in place. So he might be Joe Bloggs. When was he mayor? I might include his dates. That would be when I would include a citation, because not only to acknowledge where I've got the factual information about his dates come from, but also to allow other readers to follow up this information about a person who's, let's face it, not going to be very well known outside a particular context. But if you were writing something like about, Joe Bloggs as the Dubbo mayor in a Dubbo writing context or for a Dubbo audience, then some of those people probably do know when he was, say the mayor, the dates. So you probably don't need a citation there. But the other thing that I just want to sort of raise in this context in particular is, when statements or claims are made that, a writer might think they're fact, but they might also include some kind of, some degree of interpretation. That's definitely where we need citations. So I was thinking about another example of this from my own research. You might have a statement like dynastic conflicts largely contributed to the 100 Years' War. Now, while this is a fact, but it's also a point of view because there were other conflicts and somebody might think that other conflicts played a greater or lesser role and are worth commenting. So whilst it is a fact, this statement that dynastic conflicts contributed largely to this war really either needs to be explained or at the very least needs to be referenced to somebody who explains that particular position. So yeah, there are shades of grey, but if you think about what your audience can reasonably be expected to know and take on faith and to understand, some people might call this the pub test in particular context, I suppose. They'd be the sort of things that I, provide a framework around for referencing facts.
That's a really good point, Tanya. And I've also even heard in different disciplines, they are a bit more strict about this, and also particularly in your first year of undergrad study. So if you were doing your first year undergrad of science and you're going to mention that, this theory was developed, even if it's a very well accepted theory, you would be expected to reference it because, you're a first year undergrad, this is not necessarily common knowledge to you. Whereas sometimes the higher up you get, the less expectation of referencing every fact. But I think in a lot of terms with undergrads, we say it's better to oversight than it is to undercite. And that can be, it can be a tricky line to follow. And I would say to always check with your lecturer supervisor because they might have a bit more strict view on referencing than some do. Does anyone else want to add anything in the room? Are we good? Or we might move on to myth number 2. When I express others' ideas into my own words, I do not need to reference it. I will throw to you again, Tanya, for this one.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, in my view, we should always reference other people's ideas and information, and even when we have paraphrased that in our own words. And the key reason for this is that this is a fundamental aspect of academic honesty and ethics. And of us acknowledging where other people's intellectual contribution have played a role in the development of our own arguments. And so whilst, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later, paraphrasing somebody's ideas is always a really good idea anyway. It's good practice because it helps us to, see if we understand what they're saying. And if, it's good for our understanding, our own comprehension, but the idea is always going to be that other person's. And so citing that other person shows your readers how we've developed our own arguments and conclusions, and it positions us within that sort of wider scholarly conversation, because when we're developing an argument, we're always participating in a scholarly dialogue. And just another sort of side point from there, I guess, is that citations always strengthen your own arguments, so that if you can back up your ideas, that will generally lend your arguments more weight. So yes, I back to that over citation rather than under citation. Definitely paraphrasing requires the footnoting or endnoting.
Absolutely, and I think as lecturers, we tend to get that they prefer paraphrasing and summarizing and synthesizing over quotation, because quotation is really just blurting someone's whole paragraph or sentence at you, whereas it's better to actually put it in your own words and weave it into your argument. So just because you put it in your own words and paraphrase it in some way, you should be recognizing where that came from. Absolutely. Does anyone have anything else to add on
I
that?
could just briefly add to what has been stated. When it's definitely students are encouraged to paraphrase or summarize rather than use direct quote. But when they have to use direct quote, it's best to have authorial voice as well, rather than just copying and pasting the quote. Say what this quote means to you for the purpose of your research. That's you're developing and showing your authorial voice. So
Yeah, that's a really good point to listen. Myth number 3. So it is not plagiarism if I use the exact text from an information source, provided I reference it. So I get this one a lot, and I taught high school, and I can tell you this is an argument I've heard many times, that my essay is full of quotes, so I'm not plagiarizing. So I did have rolled down for this, but he is not here. Gilberto, would you mind having?
I'm here. I don't know.
I couldn't see you on the thing. Oh, sure. Well, could you go?
Sorry. Sorry, I was a little bit late. I had the wrong link, so apologies to everyone. No, by the way, I really enjoyed the discussion so far, and Tanya's excellent comments. I cannot agree more. So in regards to myth 3, this point, I think first of all, it's important to consider whether the original author would be happy for you to cite them, and that can be an issue when you're creating work perhaps for a course that the other person is also working towards. And so there's 2 issues there. First, there is the aspect of novelty, and the other is text that's possibly taken out of context. So when you're citing someone, I think you need to be very careful to cite ideas and words within the context that it was meant to be used for, or at least to be possibly applied for. And so for that reason, it is important that, for example, if you take someone's homework or preparations and say, hey, I've created this, this is my own work, that the person who actually started preparing that work is aware of you doing that, because you're kind of stealing ideas otherwise. That may seem obvious. It's a bit less obvious when someone is writing an article and citing all kinds of ideas quite elaborately without actually saying that all these ideas were actually not their own, but somebody else's. And this happens among academics a fair number of times, unfortunately, as well. So it's not just something that applies to students. Then there's a couple of other things. There is also the how much do you use? If you take an entire page worth of text and then place that in your own, it's not plagiarism if you reference it, but you're actually, again, kind of taking a lot of work that someone else done, placing it in your own, and in a way, you're kind of using other people's ideas very much as well as a result. So there has, you kind of have to limit yourself a little bit so that you remain, and that is key with a lot of this integrity stuff, that you remain the author, the narrator of your argument. Then there's the aspect that I've noticed a few times, again, academics, not students, people citing themselves. And again, that's actually plagiarism. And now there are rules for this. In some countries, for example, there are rules where they say, well, you can do up to this percentage of basically self-plagiarism. But in Australia, we are kind of discouraged to do that unless you're really just taking a little bit of text only. So you have to be a bit careful with that. Students should not use text they've used for one course for another assignment. And even within the same course, obviously, you wouldn't want to repeat the same text for a different assignment. That's plagiarism as well. Even though you might be referencing, you're using that text because of an idea you've already used. So it's not original. Do you copy then? That is something that may apply to historians like Tanya, for example. Do you copy text that you've seen reproduced somewhere, but you actually haven't seen the original of? I think it's quite important in that case to also at least try very hard to see the original. And if you do reference, that you may make a note and say, actually, I'm actually using text here that is reproduced. It's not the original. If it's transliterated or transcribed, it's important to say that, which goes back to, I think it's myth number 1, where you need to consider that translation is often interpretation. So if you are using a piece of text or just a sentence from another language, sometimes it's very useful to place in a footnote the original text so that people can see for themselves how you've interpreted it. And it helps other people to see why you've interpreted something in a particular way, and they can disagree with you, and then that's fine. It's not a problem at all. Finally, I would just I want to make this one thing that I encounter a lot when I do interviews. So I work on a lot on music, and sometimes my informants use rather rough language. And so, because we go out for a drink, etc., etc. So funny enough, despite everything I've said, sometimes when you're citing someone or quoting someone, you need to be mindful of ethics. So when you're dealing with informants, you may sometimes want to scale it down a tad so that your informants are cared for, that they look rational and as full human beings. That's just a little side note. Thanks.
That is a very good point. I have helped a lot of PhD students that had expletives in their research, and it was a tricky thing to, if you're quoting ethnographic research and people's comments and they are a bit colorful, how do you keep authentic and keep the integrity of what they've said, but also be mindful that those reading it may not be of a sensibility to find that one. So that's an interesting point. Do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I just would add 2 quick points. I think we can look at business from 2 kind of perspectives. One is from students' perspectives, their assignments. As our panelist has already mentioned, this is not appropriate, but another thing is that definitely Turnitin will indicate that to your marker if you happen to use the exact text from information source, even if you reference it. The only way you can use the exact text is only when you use it as a direct quote. In this case, you have to provide exact page number. It's not just the referencing, but providing exact page number. It's one of the criteria in many essays markers look at. Second aspect about self-quoting, self-referencing, I would say, here I would look from the perspective of academic outputs, like academic journals. I don't know in history or in music studies, but in politics and international relations, scholars do use their previous research and they do cite, like, I argued here about this, and they give reference to that. But in this respect, it's not necessarily self-plagiarism. But yeah, if you use the exact text the same using your previous scholarly work without changing anything, then that would be the case.
Yes. I'll move on to number 4, which is sharing previous assignments with others doing the same course is not permitted. And this is one that actually really surprised me under the new rule, that there is actually no rule against sharing. If you did it very, very well on an assignment and you want to share that with others, you may, under the new rule. It can't be copied or used, obviously, in any way. And it is encouraged for lecturers to change their assessment task every semester so that someone could not just sort of use yours as a template. But because ANU allows students to own their intellectual property, which is actually not common, a lot of universities, anything you would submit will become the university's property. So because of that rule at ANU, you actually do own your intellectual property, which is a bit interesting. So I wondered, does anyone else have anything they wanted to say about that? I think those of you know a fair bit about this.
Yeah, that's a very good question. In fact, as you rightly said, at ANU, students own their intellectual property for all the research outputs, whether they're essays or theses that they have produced. In this regard, they may seem to have a right to share their research findings. However, it's good to think what the person might do with your findings. It's great, you can talk about your research, you can share your findings, but what happens if the person you're sharing with may end up using a whole of your paper or a part of it in their research? And because this is something that you have already submitted to ANU, Turnitin will pick it up. It will pick it up and show to your marker, this has been already submitted. It's a research paper submitted by ANU student, and the person will be definitely found in the practice of poor academic practice, or potentially if this is not the first time they're doing it, they may end up having misconduct case, and this will lead to investigation, and you will potentially being caught up in investigation and collusion. So it's the best idea to think, what is the purpose of me sharing this assignment? If you're talking about it, it could be great because you own the IP. But on the other side, if you know that the intention be there for them using your code to submit for the same course, then I would suggest not doing that.
Yes, and I know a lot of students, particularly coming from high school, there's forums when you're doing the HSC where people will share their exemplary essays, sometimes for profit, sometimes just for the sense of community. And you know, that's been a standard practice when you are in high school, but yeah, you do need to be mindful of the audience. If you were to perhaps put that on Reddit and say, here is a high distinction essay from ANU in this subject, maybe the people looking at that would not be looking at it to celebrate your achievements. And yeah, it is mindful to think of the audience. I think that's a really good point, Jalneza. Would any of the online people like to say anything, or will we move on to number 5?
Oh, if you don't mind.
Oh, sure, Tristan would like to say
Yeah,
first.
I mean, look, I totally agree that putting that sort of stuff online isn't best practice, and yeah, people do sort of take those online things and then copy paste them as is into their essays, which really is unethical and misuse of your rightful intellectual property. That said, in like maybe a closed university group, so among your peers, after the exam or assessment has been conducted and marked and all that, it can be really helpful to see what other people have done and how you could have perhaps improved your own marks.
Yeah, it's like a brains trust. I think the people you study with are, your brains trust. You can share your ideas with them, and you can share how you went with things, and you can learn from them how to improve, as a group. So I think that's a good point. Sorry, Rob, did you also like to say something? So you're unmuting.
Yeah, sorry. Because it crossed my mind, I've had to deal with a few cases where people had immediately after an exam, actually while the exam was still going, because it was a very long exam that took up to 3 or 4 hours, gone online and kind of discussed the exam with other people. So when I look at myth 4, the way it's phrased, it says previous assignments. Previous really has to be previous, not still running. Yeah, because that is something that's very much a COVID thing, because I used to run oral examinations, and students would come to my room, I would examine, they would go out, and the first thing they did, tell their students, oh my God, he asked me this and this and this, which I thought was fine, go ahead. And now with COVID, I think in general, we've become a little bit more careful around timing and sharing online. And so actually something that used to be kind of almost expected by me, for example, now is something we try to avoid at all costs. So I guess this part of the new integrity rules, I think, has tightened up a little bit. Thanks.
Yes, that's a really good point about timing. Yes, perhaps live streaming 10 minutes after you've left the exam while others may still be in the exam. That's definitely not something we had to contend with when I was at university for the first time. All right, myth 5. It is okay to help a friend. Oh, this is Tara typing this late. It's okay to get a friend to help you draft your essay, basically. Oh, that's good about me. So who's got down for this one? Tristan, did you want to say? So is it right to get a friend to help you draft your essay?
Yes, I suppose it really depends on what you mean by draft. So there's a certain extent to which you can ask someone to. So I should say outside of your course. So typically, if you're doing an assessment, it's not a group project. It's better not to sort of ask other people to draft your essays from within the course, because there's sort of a vested interest there.
Yeah.
And obviously raises the prospect of being pinned for plagiarism. But in terms of asking other people to, I suppose, look over your essay and perhaps tell you where they think, for example, things might not make sense, is, I suppose, acceptable. When it gets to the point that, you're asking someone to actually type things in for you, to sort of even go through your essay and tighten up the grammar. So actually, add in missing verbs or missing commas, full stops, it sort of starts to become academic misconduct in that. Even when it comes to grammatical errors, assessments are typically graded on the basis that it's your sense of grammar rules rather than someone else's, or how well someone else can copy edit your work. Essentially.
That's a really good point. Hassan, did you have something to say on this?
Yes. So just adding into Susan's point, I think this statement also covers the confusion which a lot of students have around collaboration and collusion. So in some courses or colleges, the joint study or discussing the concepts is encouraged, but there is a very thin line between where the collaboration is and where the collusion is. So as long as students are, two or more students are working towards an academic output, but they acknowledge the extent of contribution of each in unambiguous terms, I think that's what collaboration would be. But if that acknowledgement is not there, or if it's ambiguous, then that's where collusion comes in. So for example, in this one, if a friend is helping with the essay, if it's acknowledged the extent of their length, for example, if they're reviewing the grammar or something like that, I think it has to be unambiguously acknowledged and the extent of the support, or the discussion. But if that is missing, then it will lead towards collusion. So it's a very thin
It's already a very
distinction.
gray area, yes. And I would say too, if you have a genuine reason for needing someone to type your essay for you, kind of like an access and disability angle, that is fine, but that would be stated. The thing that you have a typer who at least, just typesets what you are putting in. And there are definite reasons for that. But yeah, if someone is just sort of typing and fixing it, like perhaps some people's parents may have done when they were in high school, making their essay much more strong, that is completely not allowed. So yeah, that's a really good point. All right, number 6. It is okay to use my previous work in a new assignment. And Roald mentioned this one as well. And so this is a gray area that I discovered when reading over that 22 pages of rule, was that there is one instance where this is okay. And that is where you perhaps did the first assessment task and did okay, and then failed the subject or didn't complete the subject. If you take it again and the essay is the same, you can, in theory, submit that again. I would advise you to improve it based on, experience and time, and use a bit of extra time to get more references and more conversation, but you are actually allowed to do that in that context only. And so we'll go back to Hassan away. Do you have anything to say about this one? It is a tricky one.
Yes, it is true. Like I think Roel has already commented on that and explained very well that how the idea has to be original. If it has been used already in a previous assessment, it does not remain original. So although you can use parts of it with acknowledgement, but it would be preferable for the students to, and just to avoid the trap, if they can change the topic, I think that's an easy way of doing it.
You learn more.
Yes,
You
yeah.
delve into another area. So,
If the topic is very similar, it's sometimes natural as well that you think on similar lines and unintentionally fall into the trap.
Interesting. Did you have anything
Yeah,
to
and
say?
the only
about
other
this?
thing I'd add is there are some courses where, specifically they will sort of allow previous work from that course to be used in the final product of that course. So essentially, you might have a 10% research proposal, and then at the end of that course, you'll have a 50% research essay, which is specifically supposed to build on this, whatever you put in the proposal. And I've had a few courses which are a bit like that. And so I suppose in that instance, it is also allowed that you can perhaps not mirror exactly what you put in the research proposal, because it will be necessarily shorter and probably not as well developed, but to sort of take the core ideas from that and then transplant those into your final essay and elaborate onto them.
Yeah, and that again points back to check with your lecturer or supervisor. If you're at all uncertain, there are people you can ask and just clarify that with them, because just because you've reached something doesn't mean you intended it. So I would say definitely to check in with people. Tanya or Roel, do you have anything to say about this one before we move on? I can only see one of you.
Thank you. Look, I'd endorse everything everyone's just said. I guess an observation from experience in recent times is Students, we'd always encourage, as you just said, Tara, students to choose different topics across different courses or different issues so that they're expanding their knowledge base and experience. But my understanding, and please correct me if this isn't right, my understanding is that students can use the research they've conducted for a task in one course for, you know, a particular essay, and then use that research as on a second assignment, as long as it's a completely different topic, different arguments, all new original work and thinking. So the work technically the research work that's been conducted can be reused, hopefully always improved and extended, but for a second new original essay in a different course.
They would need to cite the original, I believe as well, in that case, if they are using sort of research that's been gathered, depending on what field we're talking about, obviously, if they've used an existing data set or bit of research, they would want to cite that just to be fair, even if they are part of that research to themselves, but it's acknowledging. So the old Google Scholar statement, we see standing on the shoulders of giants, we do need to acknowledge those that come before us, even if it is a project we did. I think yes, it's important to acknowledge that.
Can I just add a quick?
Yeah, sure.
I think I agree with Tanya's point. I think she was also probably coming from the point of that there are some key scholarly works that are used for a particular research field, whether it's a democracy or authoritarianism. If you have studied those scholars, what they said, that particular research you have done, that the data you have collected may be used for your another research to support another argument. I think that's how I understood Tanya's point. Correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, I agree with you.
Yes, it's a really great one, I think, where there's lots of unpacking to do and to understand it in your particular context, or what level you're studying at, what discipline you're studying. Make sure you understand how the academic integrity rule is applied to your college. I think that's really important.
Thank you.
All good. All right, number 7. It is okay to use an editing service for my paper if it is free. Delisa, would you like to go with this one first?
So the short answer would be no, it's not okay. The reason why is that, as you might already know, that in many courses, one of the marking rubrics in marking essays and papers would be expression, language, error-free language, and law. So it's very important that you will be doing that component independently as well, because you'll be marked for that aspect as well. For this reason, we do not, whether it's free or whether it's not free, it's not recommended that you do use editing service. Now, this could be different for HDR PhD students, because for PhD students, they do get special funds allocated for their work to be edited after the completion of the thesis. However, we cannot compare the assignment to the thesis, because thesis is original contribution to significant scholarly field, right? It's not a piece that answered to certain question, but it's also made original contribution. For this reason, I think we should mention that while PhD students may use editing service, not for the substance, but clearly for proofreading purposes, the assignments, for the assignment purposes, students should not be engaging in any sort of editing services for their works.
I would like to add that whether it's free or it has a cost, the product is much greater than you realize. So with a lot of these contract cheating services, they come back to bite people, and you can probably be very sure that those companies will target students at the ANU because they are the future politicians and business leaders, lawyers, and sort of thought leaders of the future. Recently, a variety of German politicians had to resign because it was found that they had used contract cheating services about 20 years ago, and that their degrees were therefore not legitimate. So that was a big scandal in the German parliament, and you can imagine that if you had purchased some contract essays, that in 10, 20 years, it could come back in a blackmail type situation. And it has happened, and we do ask students to come forward, and the university will support you in pursuing the people who do this, because it is illegal. So yeah, that's something to be mindful of. It's not just that one essay you're buying. It's also, think of the integrity of your own future and what implications that could have on your professional life.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I
sure.
sort of had a question on that point. So how does that sit with, so for example, in a word processing program, there's often an inbuilt editing tool there.
in building, because it's not perfect, we all know that, but yeah, it's always, you should be running a grammar check on your writing, and and reading it out loud so you can hear how it sounds. I know that sounds very silly, but every essay because I've done that's not massive, I have read it out loud to myself, and that really helps me with the flow and finding those missing bits of punctuation. So yeah, the editing thing, that's sort of inbuilt, and AI, yes, you can get away with that one. That's a great question though.
Just follow up on that.
Sure.
Would Grammarly count as an inbuilt?
That's a good one. I don't believe Grammarly is discussed
Okay.
in that sense, but I do understand, I come from an English background. I love English. I find writing very easy. And, I have a sister who loves math and science and finds writing absolutely torturous. And so she works in business. She uses Grammarly to make sure that her writing is more formal and appropriate because English is not her strong suit. So I do think that is one I would have to come back to you with, because I'm not sure, but yeah, it is tricky. And it is, a bit of a stereotype that in the sciences, engineering, people aren't as strong at writing. And just as the same, if you go to the English department and give them some physics, not going to go so well generally. So, we all have our strengths. So I think finding the limits of what you're allowed to use is a good thing. And if for some reason English communication isn't your strength, but your strength is in your research, then yes, work on applying that. And this is where I will do a very nice plug for academic skills, where you can bring your writing, your essay, your chapter of your thesis, and we will look over it. We will not conduct proofreading or any type of collusion, but we give you that idea that, hey, this paragraph isn't really structured that well. I'm not really understanding the flow, and we'll give you those tips. And we might say there are a lot of grammatical errors that need fixing in this. And so there is help out there that is perfectly committed. So you use the services that are out there for you. Don't be tempted by this quick fix solution.
Just quickly to add on what you were saying about the editing services, I've been in my previous roles involved in misconduct cases by various students, and what I found that sometimes students want to use those similar services and actually end up the assignments being done by those services. And usually, especially international students, for the first semester, first time in the university, they think it's okay because I'm just getting some help. Well, in the end, the people who actually help them convince them that it's okay, we've done it before. And unfortunately, in the cases that I was involved, they were the former students who graduated from university. And they say, oh, we know this coding, especially in engineering and computer sciences. They may start with editing element of it, but they may end up teaching students actual substance, which is coding. And this definitely will go into legal aspects such as contract teaching and collusion. So the best idea is not to be involved with any external assistance.
Yes. But if you have gotten involved, to know that the university has supports for you. And if you're feeling blackmailed or bribed, please reach out. We have a legal team for that exact reason. I will quickly go through the rest of them and then we'll do some group questions. But myth 8, I am required to reference all information sources used in an exam essay. So this is a tricky one. I'd like to go to the our online participants who have a bit more experience in marking. What is the general view on referencing in an exam?
I'm happy to jump in just quickly. I guess one thing I'd say is that well, it all depends on the rules that are set by the exam, the convener. So, for example, during COVID, of course, a lot of us went from in-person exams to online take-home assessments of one kind or another as replacements for that exam. We might have, asked people to do take-home essays as an alternative to the final semester exam, and we did request people to include citations in that final exam replacement. So it will depend to some extent on the rules, guidelines provided by the convener. Typically in humanities, in an in-room exam where you're invigilated and you have no resources apart from your pen and your paper, typically you wouldn't be expected to include citations as such, but you would be expected to draw on thinkers whose work might have inflected your thinking or responses to particular issues. So key scholars in a particular field or set of responses would be useful to mention in passing as informing your ideas and arguments, but you wouldn't in an in-room invigilated exam, you typically wouldn't need formal citations as such.
That's a good one. It really stresses students out, I think. They think they have to memorize a set of 15, 20 things to cite in their essay exam. That's generally not the case. I might move on, just looking at the time, to 9. It is acceptable to access past exam papers online. So those of you want to take this one.
So first of all, past exam papers are usually available at ANU's library website. So that kind of accessing them to be able to look at them should be okay. But we don't want to encourage students to go and find past exam papers that are shared online in other forums, as Sarah mentioned earlier. So this is not appropriate. However, I should say that many course conveners do put some exam papers from previous semesters as an example for students to have a look at. And that's actually encouraged, that's fine. But again, that's not going to forums or other external websites to look at looking and asking for fellow senior students for their past exam papers for the same course. Yeah, that would be my take on that.
Anyone from Inusa or Parsa on that one? No, that's a tricky one. We get that a lot, especially with online forums, Facebook groups and things like that. It is harder to know what is there.
Yeah, and me, I suppose, to echo what Dildo has said about course conveners putting past exam papers online, that often, like I found like pretty much 95% of my courses, they'll do that anyway. So there's no real need to worry about, I'm not going to have enough exam practice there. The course convener was always very obliging for that.
Yeah, exactly. That's a really good point. All right, and our final one before we go on to the Menti for any type of question. Myth 10, if I am accused of a breach of academic integrity, I am doomed, which we do get this a lot. Students very, very stressed when this has happened. So I think almost everyone's put their name down for this. We might start with Tristan. And then...
I might actually see this question to Hassan or
sure.
I'm happy to start. Short answer, no. We have worked very hard with the university to change the language of that allegation email, which was very intimidating in previous years. It would just put forward the worst case scenario right there, which like expulsion from the university, and that would freak students out. But I think it has changed now. It is important for students to understand that this, if there is certain level of similarity or suspicion of similarity in the work, it's an obligation of the course convener to initiate this process to understand what was the understanding of the student while doing this assessment or doing this thing. So they can very well get an outcome that there was no issue found once they have a chat with the convener. So that's a possibility as well. Once the convener understands the perspective of the student, they can be satisfied with the response. And then a step forward to that, poor academic practice. So again, with academic integrity rules 2021, the penalty for poor academic practice has been reduced. Like previously, some conveners have misused that, given 0 for the whole assessment, effectively failing a student. Now that cannot happen with poor academic practice. It's not a 0 mark for assessment. So there are many outcomes which can be reasonable for the student. It can be a very educative process as well. The conveners take the time and put the energy in educating the students of what went wrong, so that in future assessments they do not do the same mistakes again. So yeah, in short, they're not doomed unless they've done something very bad. And of course, another point to add here is the support available. So if a student receives an allegation, there's support available at different parts of the university. So Anusa and Parsa provide support to the students. They accompany them to the hearings as well, to the initial review meeting, to the inquiry meeting, and can help them draft the response to the allegation as well, which is nice. And also, there is of course support available at academic skills, advisors within the college as well. So yeah, another reason why we are not doing.
There's lots of things available.
Yes.
Rob, did you have anything to say on this one?
Yes, well, something small. So I think, as has already been said, it's important to, I think, acknowledge the mistake that you've made and speak to the convener. And generally speaking, conveners are understanding and are not trying to penalize people unfairly. And I think one of the things that I find people are a bit anxious about is this aspect of collusion. So I think in most cases, people are kind of safe as long as they reference stuff. So you can still, you know, reference things wrongly, or maybe not well enough, maybe in the wrong format, or perhaps just miss out on one or two. As long as you make that effort, I think you're kind of safe. But collusion might scare people off from discussing an assignment. And yet I would actually encourage people to talk about assignments. Of course, doing it together is a different thing, but you can certainly sit down and kind of brainstorm about an assignment. I think people should, because a lot of the learning that we do is based on our peers. Peer learning is probably one of the most important aspects of studying at a university. So if this aspect of working together, thinking together, brainstorming is putting you off, then I think we're doing the wrong thing. We should be in a different business. I would really like students to sit together and brainstorm about things, how they're going to do it. But yeah, once you do it yourself, which I hope most people will, although some assignments are, of course, for groups, then I think just try to reference things well. And if you make a mistake, the worst thing that can happen is really a teacher saying, look, you know, this is the wrong format, but they're not going to punish you enormously for that effort that you've clearly made to acknowledge other people's ideas and thoughts and words, etc. That's all. Thanks.
Excellent. I think that's a really good way to end as well on these myths, is that most of us, are not trying to commit a breach when it happens, and your lecturers will be very understanding. You will often be referred to academic skills for a consult, and they can give you tips on all range of things, from improving your next writing assessment task to exam prep to time management and stress. So it's all there, and Anusa and Parsa do some great work as well representing you if it's perhaps a serious breach or some more than multiple breaches. They will support you with that, and it's not like you're just cast into a jail cell and it all happens there. So I think that's a really good point. I know we're getting close to time, so I thought we'll just do a really quick Menti for those who are here. If you have a question, and I will get, of course, to look, first one keeps moving. I will get to that in this slightly convoluted way, because I have a single screen and I'm not used to working on that. It's spoiled working at home. So the code for this one is 4396727, and I'll put it in myself. And so, what would you like to ask about academic integrity? I'll put one that I often get on here. Got a few coming up now. What to do if you suspect classmates of cheating on an exam? Should I reference entirely new sources for each assessment to keep my argument fresh? Do we need to cite a dictionary or thesaurus? If the course convener is not following the procedure, who do we talk to? At what point is it okay to not cite other sources to build my own argument? There's some good ones here. I would say citing a dictionary and a thesaurus is probably not that essential. The ANU library does have dictionaries, encyclopedias that you can use to get that sort of foundational understanding for any assessment task. But sort of like Wikipedia, it's probably not that necessary to be citing that one. You don't want to be citing that as much. You want to sort of find some more original sources to cite. What to do about unsuspecting classmates of cheating on an exam is a tricky one. We know, particularly with social media, people have private groups where they might share stuff. And if you do have concerns, it is actually fine to bring that to the lecturer, because that, puts the whole of a degree at a questionability thing. If everyone gets a very high mark on that exam and they don't know why, then, that can put that actual course into contention. So I think it is really important to report it, and you can do so anonymously. It's not required that, you come forward, they can just investigate it. Now, what about, might go to our panelists online for, should I reference entirely new sources each assessment to keep my arguments fresh? I'm just waiting for them to unmute. Roel, do you have an answer on this one?
I was actually looking at Tanya. I thought Tanya might want to comment on this. I saw you smile as well. So Tanya, would you like to comment on this?
Oh, sure. Well, I guess to some extent, it gets back to the observation I made earlier about using research that you might have done for one course and learning you might have gained about scholarly thinking or the context of an event or a period or whatever, and using that as background for your next assessment. I'd always encourage people to do more reading, to widen their reading, because that's only going to improve their understanding of a particular issue, set of questions, the problems associated with that particular topic, and so on. But it's not necessarily always feasible or even desirable to always cite entirely new sources in a later assessment, because it may be that material you have found for a prior assessment in another course does the job really appropriately in terms of providing particular kinds of information or arguments for your new essay. So long as the arguments and the way you're using those sources is different to the way in which they were used in that previous assessment, then I wouldn't say you have to go out and find entirely all new sources, but draw on the learning. The whole point of uni is to build up a foundation of knowledge and critical skills. And so part of that is drawing on the knowledge that you've gained and the disciplinary skills that you've gained through your previous courses as you take them forward into later year courses. So no, always extend your reading, but don't feel you have to throw out everything that you've used in prior assessments in later courses.
And we often get this question, Tanya, which is, for an undergrad essay and for a postgrad essay, what is the ideal number of citations? Students ask us this all the time. How many is too little? How many is too many? Is there a number to aim for as an undergrad or as a postgrad?
It's a terrible question because, but I mean, I have to say, I did when I first started taking on first year teaching, I did start including minimums, even though I absolutely disagree with them as a principle. It's because of they provide a bit of a framework of comfort for certain student groups, but it's really about the quality of the sources. There's not much point having 10 online encyclopedic sources. They're not going to be a set of quality sources. But if you've got sort of 5 or 6 quality substantive sources, whether they're through a scholarly publisher online or in print, then they're going to be better than reading 10 encyclopedic, History Now type online websites. So it's a very difficult question to answer and to provide a decent answer for, in my view anyway.
Oh, that's right. It's a great answer. It's just one we get all the time. And I don't think there is one. And I think some faculty might have limits or, at least a minimum. But yeah, that's an interesting
one minor thing I might want to add is I totally agree with Tanya with regards to the number of, and we get it a lot. That's why many conveners have to put minimum number of required references. But I think the way I would encourage students to look at that, are my references, are my sources sufficient to support my argument? Am I making a convincing case? That's the way I think I would encourage everyone to look at it. It's not about the quantity, but it's about the quality of sources they're referencing or citing.
Absolutely. And I know we're just on time now. So I just asked very quickly, at what point is it okay to not cite other sources when I'm sort of building my own argument? That is a tricky one. I heard a laughter from the online audience.
Conclusion.
The conclusion, that's a really good answer. So yeah, it is a scholarly conversation. It's not you down at the pub chatting with your friends saying why you believe something or don't believe something, yet it is building evidence and being part of that scholarly conversation. Anything else to add, Rolls, or?
No, thanks. I was just being a bit cheeky, but yeah, I think at the end of a piece of writing, when you've already provided your readers with the materials that you're referring to, yeah, of course, then you can kind of go on and kind of draw conclusions, and maybe a new idea comes out of all that, and then you don't need to reference, let's say, smart people like, this audience.
Okay, excellent. I'll move back to the PowerPoint because we're heading into the end. Thanks everyone for coming. I've just got these slides which I'll send to everyone today, as well as make them available online when we publish the video. Just some useful links to use. Oh, Tanya's raised her hand. Sorry, Tanya, did you want to say something before we do our?
Yeah, please. It's just about the question that was raised at the beginning about the Turnitin scores and how much similarity is okay, or, that sort of thing. I just really wanted to make the point that although I know some people offer the idea that 30% or a certain percentage is what you should be concerned about when you see it as a score, it's not really about the percentage. It's about the nature of the things that are highlighted through the Turnitin process. So if it's highlighting full sentences as not being appropriate, as replicating another source, and if you identify that sentence as not having quote marks and or a very precise reference, that's the sort of thing that should be fixed up. Because you'll quite often get short phrases. So the war began in 1914, that will be replicated quite highly across many essays and books. But that's general knowledge. That's not really something that the convener would say, oh, well, that's, taking knowledge and not citing it, not acknowledging it. So it's about the nature of the things that are highlighted in your Turnitin report rather than the percentage itself.
That's great. I think Roald has something to say as well before we wrap up, as I can see another hand raised.
Yeah, very quickly, sorry. That was excellent, Tanya, thanks. I always tell my students, don't cite unless the words are special, because so many students like to throw in a lot of words because they think they're special, but quite often you can just paraphrase. So that's all I just wanted to add in.
I would say paraphrasing is your friend.
Yes.
Yes, that's a great lesson. So thanks everyone. I'm just going to quickly show up the links that I provided, which you'll get sent anyway, but just there are lots of services for you. There's training in academic integrity. There's a module that all new students have to do. If you're not a new student though, I still recommend doing it because it really frames it for you. You can also attend our training in academic integrity that we run throughout the year and especially in a week. And there's also where to go for support. So I've got both Anusa and Parsa there for both undergraduate and postgraduate, and a whole section on exams, which is super useful, especially in the changing face of exams that last year were predominantly online. They're probably going to be mixed this year or even moving away from exams. So it's really good to take a look at that and check in with your lecturer. But thank you to all the panelists for coming today and to all the students who tuned in virtually or in person. It was lovely having you in this first attempt at a hybrid session.